Welcome to our epic ocean, where critical solutions to a planet in peril are brought to the surface. Our epic ocean celebrates all that is epic about the ocean and why it is the planet's most vital resource. And now to our host, Rich Gurman.
My guest today is an artist, explorer, and tech entrepreneur with a huge passion for the ocean and overall environment. He's an active Explorers Club member, co-founder and co-host of the ULTRAMARINE Ocean Action Summit, along with Susi, and the CEO of OCN.ai, a network designed to share oceanic data and quantify the true value of marine protected areas with an autonomous system of marine-enabled robots that automate enforcement at sea. Jeremy McKane, welcome to our epic ocean. How are you, brother?
I'm doing great, man. It's great to be here and great to always talk about the ocean with you, man.
I know. I feel like we do this all the time, and I'm glad to finally do it for our audience on the show. So glad that you are here. I want to begin with a very important question, and that is it true that you are not human, but actually a marine robot?
I don't know. Is this an Elon Musk, Joe Rogan kind of situation where we now go and divulge that we're all in a simulation? I don't know.
No.
Yeah, we can get philosophical with that. What is a robot? You know, are we in fact all robots?
Yeah, I start with a joke. I start with a joke, and I get a whole long answer from it.
Yeah. Well, my old mentor would say, "Well, that probably wasn't a joke. Then it was a sentence."
Good point. So let's start. Actually, I do want to start big picture.
Yeah.
You call the blue economy the next revolution. So what is the blue economy, and why is better stewardship of the ocean so critical to both the health of the ocean and for us humans?
Great question. And I think, probably we need to kind of roll back history a little bit and think about that and ask ourselves, what is the blue economy? Well, it is the economy, point blank. I mean, everything that we have, our clothes, the food that we have, at some point, something that we have acquired has been shipped on a boat that was using the ocean. And we've run this process for, pretty much almost all of our civilized existence. But then there becomes a question of, we have an economy that's related to the ocean, but really, is that where we need to continue? Is that the status quo that we can continue to keep up? And the spoiler alert is no. We need to focus on a regenerative, renewable blue economy. And I think for the first time in human history, we are the only humans to realize that there is a problem with the technology and the capability of doing something about it. Now it's a matter of getting united and getting focused and not siloing off like it has happened in the past.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I feel like, sadly, that people typically don't care about issues unless it affects them personally. I want to focus with you today on some issues that are critical and yet not as in our face, like plastic pollution. Specifically, I want to cover munition dumping and deep sea mining. But tell us a little bit more in your mind, what's the value of a healthy ocean?
I mean, I could answer that question by asking a question, what's the value of breathing? Every second breath that we're breathing right now comes from the ocean. I think that this podcast is sponsored by the ocean. If we didn't have the ocean, we wouldn't be talking right now. And
right.
So I think, obviously that is important. There's, 3 billion plus people that depend on the ocean for protein and sustainability as far as food products go. And so the ocean is the lifeline. And the other thing that I think that's a bit, awful is that, we are kind of heading into climate week. And oftentimes we talk about the climate as if it's separate from the ocean. But the ocean is intrinsically connected to climate. It is our regulator here on planet Earth. It is the largest source of carbon sequestration that we have here on the planet. And so while we need to cut emissions, we also need to realize that we need to take care of this ocean to prevent it from acidifying and destroying what little is left.
Totally. So you and I both know the urgency, and we know what's at stake long term. How do we get the average person to care, and how do we get the presidents and the prime ministers of the world to care? What's it going to take?
Yeah, there's a number of ways to answer that question, and probably not all of them are 100% accurate, because I think we're all figuring that out. Otherwise, it would be done. one strategy that I have is I feel like we all speak the same language. It doesn't matter where we are on the planet. And that's the language of finance. It's the thing that we actually use to keep score, to know how well we're doing. How you doing financially, Rich? What's your bank account look like? Well, if you're in the negative, you're not going to be making your rent payment, so you're not doing too good. So we tend to use that as a measure of success. Now, while I don't agree that unlimited economic growth can be achieved with limited natural resources, I do think that we can go and quantify the value of a healthy ecosystem. What does that mean from a future health perspective? That means less drain on the healthcare system. What does it mean from a tourism standpoint? What does it mean from a food security standpoint? I could go on. The point is that you can quantify those things, attach a number to it, so that when you do go to a set of corporations, or you go to a country and you say, hey, look, you have these sanctuaries, and right now you're creating sanctuaries because you feel like it's the right thing that needs to happen. But what if we actually change the narrative and we said that those sanctuaries today provide you of a market cap of, let's say, $10 million in natural capital assets. But if you left them alone and just stayed away, had a no-take zone, what would it look like in 15 or 20 years? You would end up with something that was far greater than whatever that 10 million market cap was in the very beginning, because unlike gold and silver and oil, well, fish like to have sex, and a lot of it. And so, you get more and more and more. And I think the best case study for this is Dr. Sylvia Earle's Cabo Pulmo example, where the fishermen kind of came together with the politicians, everyone, and said, okay, we're not going to take anything. And when she told me the story years ago, she said she had dove the spot. And she said that it reminded her of what the oceans looked like 50 years prior. That's in just a period of 15 years. So when we talk about doing this and creating value, it can happen in a relatively short period of time, but we got to get off our butt and get this thing going.
I love that you brought up Cabo Pulmo. As you know, I live in Laguna Beach, California, and in January 1st, 2012, was that 9 years ago, 10 years ago, the city of Laguna Beach created a no-take zone. So there's a 6-mile stretch of pristine coastline here in Laguna. You can't fish. Haven't been able to fish for 9 years. And as you know, I've paddleboarded these waters every day for longer than that. And the truth is, when I started paddleboarding about 12 years ago, I'd paddle out and look down, there's no fish. And if you were to ask a fisherman why that was, you know what their answer was? We caught them all. The no-take zone went into place, and I kid you not, 6 months later, 6 months, not 15 years, 6 months, I paddle out, I look down, and there's fish everywhere. Little fish, bigger fish, dolphins, whales, like the entire ecosystem. To me, it's just the greatest example of what happens when we just leave the ocean alone. And Cabo Pulmo, to me, is the greatest example of a no-take zone probably on the whole planet. So,
agreed.
Yeah, I'm very glad you brought that up. We'll dive into these issues deeper, but I know you like to tell stories. And so I'm curious what led you down the path that you are on. You're an artist by trade with a keen knowledge of technology. How did your passion to protect the ocean come about? Tell us that origin story.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think, when I was little, my grandmother wanted me to come visit her in Corpus Christi. I live in a little place called Texas. And you wouldn't think that there was much connection to the ocean here, but there is. It's actually, we've got some pretty good kite surfing spots here in Texas. But Grandma she was always like trying to get me out of the house. And I think I'm a weird kid because I always I just wanted to hang out with Grandma and Grandpa. I didn't have to do something, but she is very the opposite. She's like, you need to go do something, like get out of the house. So she would make my grandfather go fishing with me, but my grandfather hated fishing. I didn't know this, and I didn't like fishing because I was just wanting to spend time with Grandpa. So the two of us knuckleheads are always out there on the pier fishing, never catching anything because neither one of us were interested in catching anything. We just wanted to spend time together. And then we'd come back and she's like, did you catch anything? Like, no, we didn't catch anything. She's like, great. Now I'm going to have to figure out how to make dinner. But it was those times that I would sit out there with Grandpa and I would look out at the ocean. And I remember being a kid. I was 5 years old the first time I went out. And I remember thinking to myself, well, there's got to be an end. Like, I see the edge, but there's got to be an end. Like, what happens when you get over there? And, for years after, that became kind of the thing. I remember being in the car and, when my parents would drive down there and the first glimpse I could get to look at the ocean, I would look at it and be like, there's the edge. Like, I want to go there. And I think that is apropos for the rest of my life. Like, I see something that seems unattainable and I'm like, well, I want to go there. Like, everyone says, no, it's too far. I don't care. I want to figure out how to get there. Somebody's got there before. I'm sure that I can figure it out too. And that opened up the world. Really where things started to change is that I would go there. I would see these beautiful emerald green waves crashing on the shore. And slowly but surely within time, I started seeing kind of chocolate milk covered, and I started seeing plastic and trash. And one year there was bio waste. And I'm like, well, I remember being a kid, like 8, 9 years old, thinking, what are we doing? It was like, who thought that was a good idea? And so that's kind of how that whole quest started. And I think it really helped me see it firsthand. And I think that's the case with many people. I mean, if you've never touched the ocean or seen the ocean, then you probably don't care about it. But that's where I think art comes into play, as you mentioned, is because, I believe humbly that art is the shortest distance between two humans, regardless of what you speak and the beliefs that you have. There's a side of art that's more documentarian, that kind of tells the story. But then there's the shifting of perception and getting people to see something that they otherwise would not see so they could feel. And that becomes the big question, is that, yeah, we know about these problems. We know that there's ways to fix them, but are we feeling so that we actually move to action? And I believe that art has that capability. Actually, I've seen it work in action. And so that's really what I would say is the basis of really kind of what motivates me. It's really about making the unseen seen.
I have one quote. You can't see it because it's on my computer screen. It says, "Make visible what without you might perhaps never been seen." And your art is different than mine. My art is, well, they're somewhat similar. The subjects are the same. As you know, I go out and I photograph and videotape dolphins and whales every day, and I try to show people, hey, this is what is out there, and get them, Jacques Cousteau style, to fall in love with the ocean so much and the life that lives in it that we'll begin to do whatever we need to do to protect it. From an art standpoint, how do you see art being a vehicle for real impact and real change?
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you an example. I mean, a couple of years ago, I had this crazy idea with my dear friend Ashley Baxter and my friend in the Ukraine, Alexei Rubinow, who had created a neurofeedback device, and he was going to use it for home automation, and I was like, no, I think we could use it for art, and so we created something called Lucid. So Ashley and I kind of set to work, and Alexei actually created the algorithm, and this art installation had a series of just these horrible scenes that I had filmed from around the world. Plastic on the ocean, just crap, right? The stuff that nobody wants to see. But yet I wanted to show people that they had the capability to make the change and to be the change that needed to be. And so they were handed a headset that was Bluetooth enabled, that it analyzes their brainwaves in real time. If they were able to meditate, clear their mind, be in the present moment, just make an effort, right? That's all I was asking. Just make an effort. Half the time we don't even do that. And if you could do that, I would show you all the beautiful things that exist in the ocean that still need us, that we need to fight for. And so thanks to Marcus Reimann and Francesca von Habsburg of TBA21, they connected me with the German ministry, and they were creating an art installation that was traversing Europe for about 3 years or so, and it was free. Everyone had the capability of going into this installation that would pop up 2 weeks at a time in all these different locations. And I think what was great about that is that now people had the capability of practicing a shift of a mindset. Mm-hmm. And there have been some successes because of that project, and some of the folks that were included in that really helped kind of shape some policy in the European Union. So I know for a fact it works. It's a matter of what is the message that we really need to get across. And I know we're going to talk about it in a little bit, but deep sea mining is a freaking huge thing, and nobody knows about it. Dumped munitions in the ocean is a big thing. Nobody knows about it. And this is what leads to our destruction. Our passive actions are actively destroying our planet. Rich, I don't think you get up in the morning, especially going paddling with all those dolphins, and say, today, I don't know, maybe today, I think I'm just going to destroy the planet. Yeah, it sounds like a good idea. Nobody does that. And if you do, and you're listening to this, shame on you. But I don't think anybody really truly does that. I think what we do is we make decisions out of convenience, and those convenience become an inconvenient truth to all of us. If I'm going to steal a line from a movie, but that's basically what we're up against. And I think where art has that capability is the shifting of the perspective, so that we can ultimately feel something different than what we initially thought coming in.
I like that, decisions of convenience. And it's an ignorance, right? Not calling people ignorant, but we just don't know. We don't know what we don't know. And so you're saying that art can serve as a vehicle to shift awareness, and that awareness will lead to the actions that need to be taken. And I think the cool thing is, like, we know, you probably way better than I, like, we know the things that we can do differently that will, lead to carbon drawdown, lead to things that will kind of reverse all the challenges that we're facing. So that's the good news. So speaking of those two major issues that you just brought up, I want to focus on those two, being munitions and deep sea mining, and then we'll see where we go time-wise from there. What else? Because I know those are ones that you really want to shine a big light on. So first, let's talk about, I think it's really a ticking time bomb lying on the bottom of the sea. Over the last 100 years, and correct me if I'm wrong, over 1.6 million tons of rusting munitions have been lost or intentionally dumped onto the ocean floor. These include chemical weapons like Agent Orange and TNT, which release harmful substances into the oceans, lakes, and streams. And I know that you're working with George Orbelian, who was one of the very first guests on my show here on this issue. So like you said, these issues are not really talked a lot about. Most people probably don't know much about them, myself included, to be honest. Can you lay out this problem in more detail to start with?
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, it's when we think about something, my dear friend Cyril Gooch often says that it's a design failure, it's a design flaw, like all of it. But he refers to plastic. I think that happens with everything that we do. I mean, the reason, Rich, why we're here right now is because we have countless generations of bad decisions. Imagine if just for a week we made all good, right decisions. Where would we be? Unfortunately, the issue of munitions has been quagmired with bad decisions. When we're in wartime, we're defending the country, right? What do? Well, we create munitions ready to fight, and then on Tuesday, the war's over. Oh, okay, well, what do we do with all these munitions? Well, it's okay legally. So I've been told by Terrence Patrick Long, he's the founder of the International Dialogue for Underwater Munitions. He's the expert. And so what we've been told is that, from a legal perspective, you could dump these into the ocean, and from a legality standpoint, they cease to physically exist. And if we think about that for just a half a second, it's like, well, how more we're going to crap on the ocean? Like, there's only so far we can go before the ocean goes from being our friend to our enemy. And that's what we're faced with right now. And so Dr. Jim Porter, you might have seen on was Chasing Corals. He's an amazing human being. He was the first one really to draw the connection between certain types of human cancers and the chemicals that make up TNT that have been left over in the ocean. And in some cases, some fish will end up with lesions and sharks and whatnot. And it's just this constant emission. It's what they call a single point emitter. It continues to emit this horrible substance, and then humans eat it. Well, there's a huge concentration of cancer patients, and there's not even a hotel on Vieques, which is an island just off Puerto Rico. But almost all of those cases are directly derived from munitions that have been left over in the ocean. So you remember earlier when I said our passive actions are destroying the planet? Well, every single day of inaction that we're not getting in the water and we're not removing this stuff, we are actively polluting the ocean. And that's something that we can, we're talking about this on a podcast, right? Like, that's one thing that we can do. We can get on social media, but we can also try to find other ways of how we can raise money and fund and get this done. Because unlike, say, plastic pollution, this is a finite problem, right? We know where the munitions are, and for the most part, countries, so we think, aren't continuing to dump over and over in the ocean. Every 60 seconds, a dump truck of plastic enters the ocean, probably even more now. That's an old statistic. So that's kind of like getting a mop and mopping up the bathroom when there's water spraying everywhere. It's like, first shut the leak off and then figure out how to remove it. Well, with this one, the leak is stopped. Now we got to go clean up the crap. And thankfully, we've actually got House Resolution HCR 159 in Hawaii to remove munitions in Hawaiian waters. And so we're hoping that we can actually build a group of people that would want to learn how to do this safely and effectively, and because this is an important issue. Anyway, I could go on all day talking about this thing. I'm sure you have more questions.
No, I want you to go on because it's something I don't think people know about.
Yeah.
And so I want to know more about what's being done and how these can be removed. But let's back up. When you told your backstory, I heard from you it was this contrast of the beauty and mystery of the ocean. And then all of a sudden seeing all this shit and plastic and crap in it. And that contrast, that rub created a passion for you to do something about it. And it's been the same for me. Like when I'm out there every day having these amazing experiences, and then I'm studying munitions, preparing to talk to you about it. And it's just like, what the hell is wrong with us? We're creating these weapons to kill each other, which is crazy as it is. Then we decide, we're not going to kill you anymore. So we're going to just dump these in the garbage can called the ocean, and now they're going to wind up killing us. This is probably why the more time I spend with the dolphins and whales, the harder it is for me, quite honestly, to spend time with the humans, because it's just like, what is wrong with us?
Yeah, it's the crisis of convenience.
It is the crisis of convenience, and it's a little scary. And I think the crisis of fear, and like, why would we create these munitions in the first place? I mean, we're protecting ourselves from ourselves, which is a whole other conversation. So tell me more about munitions in terms of what is being done, and can these, how are these being safely removed? How can they be safely removed from the ocean?
Yeah, so great question. Right now what happens is they do what's called a blast in place. So whenever there's a munition that's detected, usually military organizations come detonate it so that they don't become a threat to someone saying, oh, look at that nice little coral, boom. Because those are actually really real risks. But ask yourself what happens when you do that. Forget the noise. The noise that's actually detonated is over 330 decibels. That's freaking loud. Imagine if somebody was doing that, on your street. Like you wouldn't let that happen, but yet it happens in the ocean. It's the unseen. We don't know about it. Oh, well, there's other whales out there, right? And so if that wasn't just the issue, the other issue is that now you're adding more TNT to that area to detonate the existing TNT that's there. And when it explodes, you're adding all of those chemicals that make up TNT to the water column. Now, many people would tell you that the solution to this problem is dilution. And while that may be true, try pouring bleach into your drinking water. Sure, maybe a few drops or so is not going to kill you. Keep pouring it, see what happens. That's where we're at with this. And there are countless munitions alone in Hawaii. And I think what's so beautiful with what Hawaii has done in correlation with the House of Representatives and the Department of Land and Natural Resources in conjunction with IDEM is the fact that they've said, hey, we recognize that there's a problem and there's a better way to do this. And if we do it the right way, not only will we won't harm the environment, but we won't harm future people and have a drain on the healthcare system. And so HCR 159 was passed in the House, and that basically opened it up for the International Dialogue for Underwater Munitions to come work in Hawaii with alongside the DLNR and the Department of Health, so that we could actually work on an active plan. So you asked, how do you remove this stuff? It's not like Jeremy's out there with like a stand-up paddle and says, oh, there's one there, give me a rope. And there's no Crocodile Dundee business here. Terrence Patrick Long, who I was introduced to by George Rebellion, and subsequently I had a conversation with Peter Thompson, the United Nations Special Envoy to the Oceans, and I asked him about this issue of munitions and how prevalent the problem is, and that Terrence seems to be the guy that can do it. And in Peter's words, he said, yeah, he goes, it's a huge problem. He goes, but it's a hard one to tackle. It's dangerous. And he goes, but Terrence is the guy, he's always talking about it. And he's had a lot of great success. In fact, he's probably single-handedly removed more weapons out of the Baltic Sea, which is riddled with munitions, than anybody on the planet. And he's done it safely without any injuries. So we thought, well, these are the guys to do the job. So, I look at it very compartmentalized. I say, okay, we need to have some policy in place. We need to have some advocates in place. And, we've used Ultramarine for that. And then, we have to have the guys that can do the job, that are the experts that have done this for ages. Mm-hmm. Well, they also are in possession of technology that are capable of neutralizing the threat. So, they don't want to mess with something and then themselves get detonated. So they can actually assess the type of bomb it is, if it has a fuse, if it doesn't have a fuse, if they move it, could it detonate? Well, let's see if we can, isolate the problem, bring it up to the boat, and then they basically, have a process of actually removing it so that it's not left in a landfill or something like that. So, they have a method to their madness, and really, I think their biggest challenge is funding. And, we're looking at all kinds of creative ways to help them, get across the finish line.
Wow. You just, like 100 new questions just popped in my mind hearing all that. So, okay, so let's say we start pulling more and more of these out of the ocean.
Yeah.
Where do we put them?
Yeah, so these are chemicals, and then so this is my understanding is that they have the capability of neutralizing these chemicals with different types of chemicals. So it's the way that I understand it, which is I'm not a chemist. I'm like you. I'm a lover of the ocean. I just want to bring all the cool kids together. But the cool kids tell me that what they do is they take another type of chemical, and it's like the equivalent of taking like a base and an acid. You put them together, the whole thing's neutralized, and their mission is to neutralize it as environmentally friendly as possible. Right now, leaving them where they are is not the environmental solution. So, that's kind of the mission of how they do it. And they have there's probably a whole separate podcast of exactly how the technology works. And that's not my forte, but I talk with them, that group, every Wednesday. And it's really fascinating, the kind of technology that they're considering to deploy in Hawaii for this.
Amazing. And you mentioned funding, which seems to be the answer to, it's like the line in, was it Vanilla Sky, where Tom Cruise said, his father used to say that the answer to 99% of questions is money.
Right.
And you mentioned money earlier. I remember my very first mentor, he used to always say that money is how business people keep score.
Yeah.
So in this case, where do you see this funding coming from?
Yeah.
And how can people listening, if this is like striking a chord with them, how can people get involved?
Yeah, great question. So I think there's a couple ways to get involved. And funding is a huge problem. But I'm a big advocate of show me that you're capable first before we even talk about money. And with a group like Terrence's, they're completely capable, and you have created a budget and all these kinds of things. So it's phenomenal to see what they've done so far. But some of the ways that we're talking about funding it is some of the guys from the Snarky Sharks NFT group approached me and said, "Hey, we've got to do something about these munitions." And I was like, "Yeah." So simply collecting Snarky Sharks is one way of funding it. We're also talking to another group that's actually going to help us, with like some smaller, $1-2 donations to kind of help with that. But we're also looking at ways to kind of look at public funds as well. If we have a budget, we know what we're going to do, we know how we're going to remove this stuff. I want to be able to make the argument that future healthcare costs will be diminished significantly if we just be preventative. Otherwise, we're just going to be kind of band-aiding the problem altogether. So I'm looking at a number of ways. But yeah, I would say, the easy thing to do if you wanted to, Snarky Sharks is an easy way to support this. They're doing such a great job, and they're donating some of their proceeds to this thing. And then, of course, you could just go to underwatermunitions.org. I believe that there's a donate button there. You just be specific. Whenever you make that donation, say, I want to remove these 2 bombs at the Molokini site. That's actually the reason why we started talking to Hawaii, because the Navy was going to detonate them. And thankfully, they were nice enough not to do it. How long that's going to last is another story. But now that we have the team and we have the House resolution in place, we feel like maybe we can all work together and kind of coexist in that space. And so our mission is to really try to help remove those first 2 munitions. But as Terrence tells me, he feels that with the initial study that they do, not only will they see the 2 munitions, but they'll probably find hundreds. And so the cost is the same to remove 2 or 200. So I'm really hoping that we can be the overachievers and say, yeah, we're going to go remove those bombs. And then we find several more that we remove at the same time. Overachieving is a thing for me. So I'm looking forward to it.
I like it. Yeah, and I would hope that the governments of the world would want to fund a project like this. Maybe I'm being naive, but it sure seems like something that on a big scale could be handled. Like you said, just from the health perspective alone, I would hope that would be enough to get them to take some action.
Yeah.
On a lighter note, I like that you brought up Cyril. True story. I had a vision this morning. For anyone that, if you don't know who Cyril is from Parley for the Oceans, watch my interview with him. And I had a vision because I know Jeremy wears his red glasses, and if you've ever seen Cyril. So my vision was a celebrity death match between Jeremy and Cyril.
No. Cyril, if you're watching this is a bad idea.
I think it's a good idea. Come on, Jeremy, let it sink in.
I just
idea because by tomorrow you might love this idea.
I just texted him this morning. He's looks like he's on vacation. Well deserved rest.
Yeah, he's a hard worker, that guy.
Yeah.
All right, we go from a light joke to another deep issue, literally a deep issue. In many ways, this is another out of sight, out of mind topic. And it's starting to get a lot of attention now, thanks to people like you, and that is deep sea mining.
Yeah.
As you know, our last episode was with Daniela Fernandez, who I know you love, and I totally fell in love with her just in that
she's amazing.
Conversation. She is just a wonderful human being. And we touched on this very lightly, and I want to go deeper with you. So, for anyone not familiar, deep sea mining is the process of retrieving mineral deposits from the deep sea, 200 plus meters down. Essentially, we are depleting the terrestrial deposits of metals like copper, nickel, aluminum, lithium, and zinc. And our demand for these metals used for things like our smartphones and batteries is increasing. So we are mining the depths of the ocean to find them. Some people argue this is a good thing because these minerals can be used to make batteries for electric cars, to make wind turbines and solar panels. Items that can replace carbon-emitting vehicles and factories that are destroying our climate. But, Jeremy, what are the negative impacts of this in terms of disturbing the ocean floor? And also, and you mentioned this with munitions, the noise and light pollution, which impacts marine animals.
All good points in that question. We're going to have to unpack that a little bit. I think, the real issue, the real threat is the unintended consequence of deep sea mining. We just don't know. We don't know. I like to tell people, and if you're listening to this podcast and you happen to be outside and it's at night, go look up at the stars. Look at how vast the universe is, just from your own perspective. And know that we know more about that than we do our own ocean. Now let that one sink in. And there's my ocean pun for the day. I think that when we look at, what we don't know, there could be a lot of great potentials. I recently had this discussion, was with Henry Puna, who's the former prime minister of the Cook Islands, during COP25. And they were talking about mining in their economic exclusion zone. But my question was, I kind of phrased it this way. And I said, look, I'm from this little place called Texas. And in 1901, near Beaumont, Texas, they found this black stuff that came out of the ground. And up until then, we were slaughtering whales because they had blubber, which sidebar is bizarre, right? You got these sentient animals that have been on the planet longer than us, and the best case we can find for them is to take their oil so we can light a
lamp.
Anyway, I digress. But we use this black stuff, right? It fueled our homes, we powered our cars, and Texas became extremely wealthy. But that 1901 Spindletop in Beaumont, Texas, was the beginning of the oil and gas industry, and it's one of the reasons why we stopped hunting whales. But the reason why we're fighting climate change was because of that day. It was because of our unintended consequences. We realized, again, we could design a whole system around this stuff because it will solve this problem that we have, not realizing that you're creating another problem that you might not be able to solve on the tail end, the unintended consequence. So my question to Prime Minister Puna at the time was, okay, so you go mine this stuff in the areas that we have yet to discover. Will my great-grandchildren and my children be also mining be also fighting mining in the deep sea and climate change. And he says, well, we won't take all of it. That was his comment. But they're also in a precarious situation. Every island nation is in a precarious situation because they need money. They need something to drive their GDP. And what do they have? They have these riches in their ocean. And it seems like an easy thing to go get, right? And it's one of the reasons why I created the Ocean Currency Network, was because I wanted to, if I'm physically telling somebody that they can't do something economically because it's not good for the environment, you can't just walk away and say, well, I did my job. You have to re-inject some other economic driver to say, let's focus on this because this is regenerative, and in the long run, you're going to be healthier. The biggest, greatest threat that we have right now is deep sea mining, full stop. That ecosystem that lives down there has relied on the same food sources for over 150 million years. It is the least likely ecosystem to change and adapt on planet Earth or planet Ocean, depending on how you look at it. And so tomorrow, there's even some, of course, this is being recorded, but, the metals company is proposing to merge with a company called Sustainable Opportunities Acquisition Corp. And they're trying to convince this idea to their shareholders that mining is a good idea. It's not a good idea, right? We need more time. At least, if anything, give us a moratorium. Give us 10 years so we can at least study the effects of what mining would do and have comprehensive third-party independent data that tells us one way or the other. Because God knows, all of us, the greatest projects that we have are the ones that are our very own, and we tend to look at things through rose-colored glasses. And this needs to change, because I promise you, you think climate change is a problem now. This is nothing. This is not. Deep sea mining has the potential to be game over for the human race as we know it. And while I agree with the sentiments of the metals company and Gerard that we need to go towards an electric revolution, I wholeheartedly agree, but this is not the way.
So let's back up a little bit, and not to scare people, but what are those negative potential impacts of us going down there and mining, disturbing the ocean floor, impact on marine animals? I think a lot of people listening don't. This is a new topic for them. So if you could just share that basic info.
Yeah. Well, for one thing, you have to remember the fact that the ocean is the greatest carbon sink. Right. And so all of this carbon and the stuff that's sitting there at the bottom is the stuff that's been sequestered for eons. And to start off, you're disrupting that, right? You're going to basically send these massive vacuum cleaners. I mean, what happens when you vacuum your house with a dirty vacuum cleaner bag?
I don't vacuum my house, Jeremy.
I don't either. But, I don't even have carpet because I think it's gross.
I have my little handy vac.
But if you have a dirty vac and you're vacuuming, you're going to end up with just crap all in the air, and you're going to smell it. You're going to get allergies, all these kinds of things. That's what's going to happen with these massive vacuum cleaners. These vacuum cleaners are 3 and 5 stories tall. They're massive machines that you would see that would move great amounts of earth, and they're sucking up the soot, and they're getting those little manganese nodules. They're sending them up to the surface, and then there's this plume. Now we're talking 3,000 to 5,000 meters. That's 15,000 feet. Imagine sitting on your front porch of your house and looking at the airplanes that are flying over, that are coming in approach to your local airport, and saying there's a plume of smoke that high. Now, as that continues forward, as the currents carry it, it's going to interface with marine life and other things and coral reef systems. You start compounding the problem. That's not even touching the fact that we know that everything on this planet is intrinsically connected. None of us are above one another. We're all equally independently connected in some different kind of way. And even the microbes that exist in our body, there are actually more microbes in our own bodies than there are stars in the known universe. We are literally walking around as universes. So the same is true with the ocean. All of these things are connected. And if we look at the food systems and the hydrothermal vents, it wasn't until the 1970s we thought, the hydrothermal vents, they're so hot, there's no way anything could live down there. Well, we now know that's not true. In fact, we now know that that's some of the most biodiverse areas on the planet, right? And that's just a span of 40 years or so, right? 50 years. And so now, so now we know that. And if we start making these rash decisions without doing the proper research, we could undo a lot of things that ultimately will make its way up here to land, and then we will be stuck with no recourse whatsoever. We'll just have to take the consequences, because at that point we will have deserved it.
So if you had control of this whole situation, what would you mentioned give us 10 years moratorium to really research it. What would you want to see done in the very short term on this issue?
Yeah, I mean, immediately. Look, I'd love to sit down with Gerard from the metals company. I'd love to sit down with every single one that has a stake that says this is where we need to go, because I agree with him. We need to move to an electric revolution. But there's no reason why we should stab ourselves in the chest while we're trying to get there. And I think that, one of the things that I think is very adamant is that we stop calling this deep sea mining, deep seabed mining, all the things that they call it now. That's not what this is. What this is conflict minerals. Because if you start extracting things from the deep sea, you will inevitably create conflict. There will be wars fought. Well, mark my words, there will be bloodshed. And we have to look at what we have and say, what is the least path of resistance? Right now, as much as I hate it, the least path of resistance is terrestrial mining. And I hate the idea that we're even mining to begin with. I would really like to see us going to places like Ghana where we have e-waste. I want to see if we can find a way to reuse the metals that are in those computers that we're just dumping on this poor country. And they're doing horrible things because they're trying to extract the metals, so they burn it, then they end up breathing the crap that goes. I mean, it's continued. But if you all of a sudden stop all of the processes that the traditional mining world has, there's going to be conflict there. There's going to be conflict from the standpoint of you're removing these precious metals from the ocean and you're affecting the change. And if you affect the change of what 3.5 or so billion people require as a food source, then you've got another problem there. And so whenever those conflict, whenever humans have no other choice, no other course of action, what do they resort to? Violence. And that is part of the core issue. It's not just about the environment. It's about the absolute disruption of everything that we know that is sane at the moment. And there's not too many things anymore that's left that's sane. So, Victor Vescovo, who's also a fellow explorer, him and I were on a chat one day, and he was the one that was like, these are conflict minerals. Full stop. Conflict minerals. And I think people need to put that in their vernacular. Don't be afraid to say it. That's what it is, And I do think I sit in a very unique spot where I look at the conservation side and I also look at the business side. Mm-hmm. And there are other ways. So I would never be an advocate of saying, okay, well, screw this. These guys are horrible. But maybe we could go work on something else. Is there another way that we could acquire metals? And I know people have mentioned, well, we could mine the moon or all the. I don't know if those are viable solutions, but there has got to be another way. It can't be one way or the highway.
Well, I guess the $1 million question becomes, how can we produce the metals we need to build a green technology without causing more environmental disasters? Right.
I mean, well, if you think about the engineering that requires to go down to the bottom of the ocean, it's not like going to space. The salinity is out of control. The pressure can be up to 14,000 PSI. It's not like going to the moon. I mean, they went to the moon in the 60s with a smaller computer than probably what that's in your calculator. And here I am walking around with a supercomputer in my pocket.
Right.
To go to the deep sea is extremely challenging. Why not just use those same resources and mine the e-waste facilities that we have? Because we keep building this stuff. Every design that we have, whether it's plastic pollution, everything, it all comes back from linear design. If we start thinking about things in a circular design, after we're done with something, how do we upcycle it and move to the next thing? That is a better way of designing. And there's more that I think about it. Like I said, Cyril talks about it mostly in plastic. It's everything. Everything that you can think of that we touch, that we design, it's always linear. It's not circular. And I think, if I was chairman and CEO of the metals company, which is a great name, by the way, it tells everybody exactly what you do. I would go to Ghana. I would go to all these places where I can grab e-waste, and I would use all the resources I had, probably less money than what it takes to build these machines to mine the deep sea, and figure out how to take the metals out of those devices and repurpose them for the next electric revolution.
Well said. Yeah, no, I'm far from an expert. This just, to me, seems like yet another way that humans are tapping into a finite resource with little or no regard for the long-term consequences. So upcycling, like you're saying, and we'll get into upcycled fashion in a little while, but it sure seems like a big part of the answer. Anything else you want to share on this in terms of what can be done to either stop this or mitigate this potential onslaught to reduce the environmental impacts?
Yeah, I mean, come on. I mean, I ask everyone that's listening right now, like this is something I always say when we're on Necker. I've always said this to everybody, is that every single one of us has a superpower, right? There's not a Superman of the ocean, as I've said before, but there is a Justice League, and every single person listening right now is part of that Justice League. But I don't know what your superpower is. You know, you might be like Rich. You might have a podcast. We'll talk about this stuff. Get it out there. Make sure everyone knows what a conflict mineral is. You might run a newspaper, a magazine. You might a television station. You might be an anchor on TV. Man, get the word out there. You know, we only typically make decisions when things are an emergency. We don't do that because we're comfortable. You know, there's a reason why starving artists create great work. It's because they're trying to hustle just so they can keep food in their belly. Right now, we're hurting. And we are the only humans ever to walk the face of this planet with the capability of actually doing something positive. The question is, will we?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a reason most of the great music created was not by happy musicians, right?
Right. Exactly. Tortured musicians. We're a tortured race is what we are.
Yeah, we're tortured humans. Let's talk technology. And I just want to preface everything we're saying, and this is one of the things that I've loved, like Daniela Fernandez, who you mentioned. We talked about these tough issues, but she, as a 25-year-old, not only is doing something about it, but she is just oozes of hope and positivity in the face of all these things going on. And I know you do also. I mean, I wanted to have this deep conversation with you and let really shine the light on these issues that aren't getting enough attention. But I know you still always retain hope and solutions to all this. So I just want to mention that. So let's talk technology, and I'll preface this by saying I'm far from a tech expert. How are you using technology like the blockchain and NFTs to further your mission as both an artist and an ocean tech entrepreneur? And for those who don't know much about the NFT phenomenon, perhaps a little explanation is in order, and also a little blockchain 101.
Yeah, so let's break that in two parts. Let's start with just kind of like the need, right? There's a need to share data, right? We're now at a point where we have sensors and we have the capability of understanding, but we don't really share very well. Like we just, it's like, there's still a lot of I don't know, issues in the sandbox. Let's just call it that. And so I recognized that this problem existed about 3-4 years ago, and I sat down with my co-founder Cody Marks Bailey. And we talked about, one of the things that I like about blockchain is the fact that it's a transparent ledger, right? Everybody has access to it. They can all see what happens and we can confirm stuff. And that's kind of what happens socially, right? And if I say to a couple people, hey, this guy Rich wants to be on his podcast, like, who's this guy? Is he a good guy? Oh man, love Rich. He's great. You get enough of those, you're like, okay, he's a great guy. And then off you go, right? And it's probably the same thing before you had me on your show. Like, who's this Jeremy guy?
I didn't check you out at all. I didn't know I could.
There you go. Google is your friend. So that's how we already operate, but sometimes our emotions get in the way, and that doesn't always play fair. Whereas machines, it either is or it is not. Simple as that. And so what I really liked about the idea of having data on the blockchain was that in order for it to be written on chain, it would have to be confirmed by a number of sources, whether that was with sensors that were using artificial intelligence or just dumb sensors that said, oh, this is what the temperature is. And if we could do that, then we could start to maybe have a better picture of things. But beyond that, the reason why I've done that, and I touched on this a little bit when we talked about the Cook Islands and some of the other challenges with small island nation states, is that they're doing some of these things because they need the money, And I was thinking to myself, well, how do I tell a bunch of fishermen I don't want them to fish anymore? Because what they're doing with this overfishing and or illegal fishing is hurting the environment, and it's actually cutting their nose off to spite their face.
That's right.
And so, we came up with the idea of, and it was right around the time of the Cambridge Analytica scandal. And I realized that our data on Facebook was very valuable. Whether, didn't matter where you were eating or whatever it was that we were posting, somehow that was valuable. And it was value on a massive scale, but not on a nano scale. And I thought, well, what if we could do the same thing with the ocean? What if we could have data on a massive scale, have it processed through, machine learning algorithms to really ultimately get a feel of what was about to happen before it became a catastrophe? And then going back to using finance as a way of keeping score, what if I went to Prime Minister Rich here and said, hey, you know that at any given time you have about $250 million worth of natural capital assets floating around in your waters. I mean, if you had warehouses with product, you would have somebody that was running an audit and they would tell you how much your product was in there, and then you could figure out what your margins were, right? But what if we actually, instead of killed the fish and pulled them out of the ocean, what if we cross-collateralized them? What if we said, well, we have $250 million, but we're going to put a 15-year moratorium and a no-take zone, and we're going to actually take out a loan for $250 million, and we're going to focus on other things that generate positive GDP for our country. Jobs, whatever, education, could be anything. When 15 years comes around, and you've done a good job at protecting it, because now technically the person who's given you the loan has put a lien on that area, and they probably have a financial wherewithal to be able to protect it to make sure that you're not fishing and double dipping, no pun intended, or maybe it was. Then now what you end up with 15 years later is a number far beyond 250 million. And so you can either decide to release some of that area as a fishable area, but I think what most people will find is, like the example of Palau, is that they protected 80% of their territorial waters, and of the take zones, those take zones had more fish than they had ever had. Well, the fish aren't stupid. They know that there's an area where there doesn't seem to be any boats, so let's go hang out here until it becomes more crowded. So I do think that there's a way to solve this problem, and I think it has to do with the way that we look at this as a market capitalization rate that is based off of this. And so us at the Ocean Currency Network, yes, we are looking at this as a form of currency in the future. But really what we are is we're a company that's measurement as a service. I feel like, just like when you get up and you watch the surf report, you know what the surf report's going to be, and you got like a rating system and all that kind of stuff. How rad would it be if we also watched the news and it said, hey, our ocean health index is at X today, which is +5 from yesterday. If us as, the humans and the public that's around the ocean realize that there's a financial incentive and there's also a health incentive for us to actually do the right thing by the ocean, I feel like it'll always be the forefront of our mind. But without that, I think we're lost.
And what I'm hearing from you is we can make all these changes to this blue economy, and it's going to help everybody. It's not like we're going to put people out of work, out of jobs, take down governments. It's the exact opposite. It's just kind of waking up to the reality of what is needed to be done and do it in a smart way, and everybody's going to win, right?
It's just a perception shift. That's all it is. I mean, the blue economy as is, where is worth $1 trillion per year. But a regenerative blue economy can be worth a whole lot more because you're not take. You're giving in the process in the middle of it. And so the mission with Ocean Currency, as well as what we're doing at Ultramarine, it's a joint mission, and that's to help facilitate the capability to meet the targets to protect 30% of the world's ocean by 2030.
Got it. Tell us a little bit about NFTs and specifically in context of how, or I guess I'll ask as a question, can NFTs have a lasting effect for raising money, for cause-based and impact-based projects, for groups and individuals? And it seems like a lot more fun way of going about it than having to write grants all day long.
Well, I mean, I think I became interested in it because, Cody Marks Bailey is really good friends with William and Tricken, the actual founder of ERC 721. It's what we call NFTs. And it was then that we actually thought about creating these NFT buckets of oceanic data. And it's one of the ways that we stored and organized this data. But it wasn't until, I guess, the pandemic, a guy by the name of Justin Blau, who's a DJ, said, dude, man, you got to put your artwork on the blockchain. And I was like, I don't know, man. I don't think that, like, the people that I know in the art world, they're not going to collect on the blockchain. There's just so much. There's a huge barrier to entry, And for those of you that know what I'm talking about, you know that you have to get these wallets and MetaMask, and there's a place to, store all of your codes, and you don't want to, it's a lot, right? When you could go to a gallery and see something on the wall and just give them your credit card, right? And so what I didn't account for was that there was a whole group of people who held crypto and maybe even didn't even care about putting something on the wall, but they wanted to support the artist and they wanted to care. Where I really thought that this was a game changer was the fact that as I sell something on the secondary market, I get 10% of that sale. Whereas before, I could have a piece that's sold at the gallery for $5,000 or $6,000 and then Christie's for $1 million. And I really wouldn't care because I would not get any of that money. Okay. And so I think from an artist perspective and kind of continuing the legacy of supporting artists, this was a really cool thing. Some of the caveats, of course, to this is that, it was on the Ethereum blockchain, and Ethereum uses an enormous amount of energy, right? Because there's an algorithm that is sent out to all of the miners that basically says, okay, here's this ridiculous problem, and whoever can solve this problem the fastest is going to win the block. And what that means is you get a financial reward for the fastest pool of computational power. But that computational game is just a game. It doesn't actually do anything in the real world. So it's a huge waste of energy. That all goes away, of course, in a few months with something called Ethereum 2.0, which will actually reduce the amount of electrical usage on the Ethereum network by 99.99%. Something that's called proof of stake, which is the versus proof of work. Proof of work is proving that you can solve this problem in a timely fashion. And so while the issues surrounding NFTs and energy consumption are very short term, I think the long term is really bright. And the reasons why is because I can collect something, I can be proud that I own something, it can go to a specific cause, and if I sell it again, I'm still supporting the artist because it's still going to them and or their cause. And I think that what we're going to see is, we're not going to see I have photography and stuff that's up there, but I think we're going to start to see more generative projects that actually change with variables using certain oracles. And that's one of the things that we're doing at the Ocean Currency Network is we're using some of these oceanic variables so that we can actually provide that data to artists so they can use that in generative pieces and tell the story in a different way. Mm-hmm. And I think when we start to really look at the power that presents and the type of art that can be created that doesn't exist right now in normal venues, it really opens up the way that we communicate to each other and identify what is and what is not a real problem.
Mm. I want to back up a little. You kind of answered my next question, which was that there's been a lot of press about the negative impact to the environment, specifically.
Yeah, I try to usually hit that one on the head.
You're like, I'm going to answer that before you ask, but
yes.
Back up and repeat that. You're saying you said the next 2 months?
Well, several months. It's whenever, anyway, I don't know exactly when the time is, but when the proof of work process goes to proof of stake, there will be a significant reduction of power consumption. And that's just Ethereum. There are other chains out there that you can do NFTs on that don't require all of those types of proof of work algorithms. There is always an option is the point. But yeah, but the majority of the money is sitting in Ethereum, and I think when we go to ETH2, all these conversations will kind of just disappear because right now there's not a lot of people that understand how this technology works, and so they hear sound bites and they repeat them. Yeah.
And I'm glad you brought this up because obviously I'm thinking, Jeremy, as someone who loves the environment, is obviously not going to spend a lot of time, energy, and invest in something that's going to be the exact opposite of what he's trying to accomplish. So right. That's good to hear. Okay, let's shift a few more topics I want to hit. One we touched on briefly which is upcycled fashion, another topic of interest to you. And I think this will be the very first conversation that we've had about it on this show. So can you explain why fast fashion, mass consumerism is such an issue?
Yeah. I mean, it's one of those kinds of things you don't think about. It's just like the others, the deep sea mining and the munitions and, conflict minerals, all the things. Like you just kind of go about your day, I need a shirt. I'm going to go to said store and I'm going to buy a shirt and, I'll chuck this other one in the trash, or hopefully you donate it. I don't know what you do, but it's just, that's the process that we're in. Fast fashion is the number one polluter behind big oil. And if we think about, a lot of our clothes are made with plastic, so that even when we wash them, the microfibers end up into the water. And then once those little micro nanoparticles are in the water system, it's virtually impossible to remove. So this is also why we have bioaccumulation, where fish are eating this stuff because they can't see it either. And then we're eating the fish, and then we got the plastic in our body. I heard some ridiculous thing, and I've never been able to quantify and actually see if it's true, but it seems real. It says that we eat a credit card worth of plastic every single week.
Yeah.
That's bananas, man. That should have never happened. And the reason why that's happening is because of design. It's all a failure. And I think, when we look at, all of this, I think that's really the thing that kind of I just keep going back to. And I feel like that's the way out of this. If we could just get our heads on straight.
Wherever Cyril is on vacation now, he's vibrating. He's feeling this right now.
You know what? I got to give props to him. He and I, we don't always see eye to eye, which is okay, because I think that's how good things are going to happen. But I will say that he's always challenged me in some ways, and kind of like getting me to see things in different ways. And I think probably I've kind of nudged him a little bit. In fact, he and I have been talking about the munitions thing, and he's a guy that's. He's an ocean guy, right? Yeah. And he didn't realize the threat that munitions pose. And so if a guy like that doesn't know about it, then how is the public supposed to know? So we just got to get on this stuff. Anyway, I feel like I veered off your question. Did I answer it?
I don't remember what the question was. But we still want to have that celebrity death match. We're gonna get that scheduled. Well, let's talk a little bit more about just explain to people, like we're saying. I don't think most people consciously think about upcycled fashion.
Yeah.
We just need a shirt, I go buy a shirt. So what makes recycling old or vintage clothing into new and an eco-friendly practice? Yeah, no, I think these textiles and having them thrown away. I mean, it's not an uncommon practice when certain brands are not sold. They go to consignment. If they don't sell there, they get destroyed. They get thrown into the landfill. Tons of clothes are shipped to other countries because they have no place to go, and they end up in the landfill. Ashley Baxter and I, dear friends, she's also modeled for me on a number of my projects over the years. We've been to some of the most remote places on the planet, and we've come across virgin beaches where there are no humans, but there is the trace of humans everywhere. And you think, oh, it's plastic bottles, it's plastic bags. No, we found shirts there. We found shorts, flip-flops. At one point, I remember in Australia, I found this one beach that was just quagmired with flip-flops. And I thought, well, the least I can do is just find a pair to wear at home. I couldn't find a right and a left. And I looked. And I don't, there's got to be some secret gyre that's taking all the right flip-flops. I don't know how, or maybe just that part of the world, everybody has two left feet. They're all bad dancers. Yeah, exactly.
Maybe that's what it is. I don't know. But it really drew home at a point I was going to bring up earlier, and I got sidetracked. This happens a lot. That's what happens when you have dyslexia and ADD. Is that, I looked at all this stuff and I said, gosh, man, somebody should do something about this. Just clean up your place, not realizing, like, that's what we all do that. We absolve ourselves of responsibility when we say, oh, well, the government should do it for us, or the big corporations should do it. No, get off your ass and do something yourself. Like and I'm talking to myself. And that's when I realized that using art in this way is really important. So Ash and I have been working together on a number of things. She worked with me on Lucid and whatnot. And unfortunately, she had a traumatic brain injury. It really left her out of commission for about 4.5 years. I mean, she's a professional windsurfer. She's a cliff diver. And, things happen. And she's fully recovered. She's out of the woods. And she's kind of came out of this realizing that, she wanted to do something relating to fast fashion. So we've been kind of talking about some ideas. And she kicked off this brand called Winslow. And I said, hey, why don't I create a series of NFTs, and then we can use the funds to help launch your brand. And so it was really great, because it was like there's this part of me as kind of the communicator, as the artist, that just wants to create just for the sake of creating. But I get really inspired by individuals who have done or are about to do great things. And I feel like as an artist, our jobs are to amplify those people. But I think, the fast fashion thing is really important, because, we're heading into New York Fashion Week coming up, and we're going to be thinking about what's new on the runway. We should be asking ourselves, what's new that's been upcycled, out with the old and upcycled into new. That should be our new model.
I love that. I can't remember who said it or when it was said, but there was something about how, hopefully I won't botch this, that the beauty of art is that it has no purpose. Mm-hmm. create just for the sake of creating. And that being said, I love that you are bringing purpose to the art, right? Bringing impact through the art. And it's to me, art, why do we love a piece of art? Why do we love a piece of music? It creates emotion within us. And I think it's that emotion that's going to lead to, like we're saying, hopefully shifting the actions that we're taking to make a positive impact. So I love that. Let's shift into anything else around upcycling that you want to share. I want to shift into marine protected areas next.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I just would say is that, when you are looking at New York Fashion Week that's coming up, think about all the things that we could do together and how great it would be if we focused on upcycling. And I think there are some big companies right now that are focused on this, but I think we could spark a whole new genre of designers that are focused on this. And that's the world that I want to live in.
And it goes back to your question for the companies who might be thinking, I would see them thinking, if we just recycle and wear vintage clothing, they're not going to buy our new stuff. So if we can figure out how can they still, right, make money through this process and everybody wins, I think that's the conversation that needs to be had, right? Absolutely. All right, let's talk MPAs. You do a lot of work in marine protected areas. We talked about the marine protected area / no-take zone here in Laguna Beach, which obviously I'm a huge fan of. It's one thing to have an MPA sanctioned and approved, and another to enforce it in perpetuity. So what work are you doing in this space, and why is this so important?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think going back to what we're doing at the Ocean Currency Network is really trying to quantify the true value of marine protected areas, and we look at ourselves as a company that's a measurement as a service. So, which is what we need. In fact, I think one of my favorite quotes is Lord Kelvin. He said, "If we want to improve it, we must first measure it." Problem is, well, we don't really measure things, right? In Hawaii, there's a word called kapu. In French Polynesia, it's tapu, and tambu, and Fijian. It's all the same thing. Stay away, right? And the tambu that exists in Tatoya is one of the very first, if not the first, marine protected area in all of French Polynesia. And I had a chance to go there with Marcus Ryman and Francesco von Habsburg from TVA 21, and it was amazing to see that they had kept it up. And I happened to be there with the paramount chief of the Lao group. His name is Rokasau, and I had asked him, I said, "Can you explain to me this ancient practice of tambu? How do you... what I don't understand is we have marine protected areas, we have no-take zones and sanctuaries, and they're protected and no one goes in them, and we leave them that way for God knows how long. But I always have asked the question, how do you know how effective it's been? And I get a plethora of answers from marine biologists that are, they're doing everything that they can because they're studying and they're understanding. But the sheer question I want to know is, are there more fish? Is there an increase of biodiversity? And some marine biologists have started really kind of quantifying this in different ways, which is really exciting. But the ancients would actually go and count fish, which I thought was really fascinating. So he says, in Fiji, what we would do, we create tambu, and he goes, we would go count the fish. And when we have so many fish we can't count, we release the tambu, we go fish. And I was like, that seems pretty straightforward. So I come back to Hawaii and I ask, hey, do you guys count fish? And they're like, what is wrong with you? Like, what kind of question is that? Like, do we count fish? Well, we do these measurements. We have, but it wasn't to the level that they had done, and probably because it's extremely time consuming. So I kind of took a step back and I was like, well, I'm probably not going to convince the next, Harvard graduate to, go count fish.
The fish counter.
Yeah, it's not top on the list of careers. I think probably at career day. So I was like, well, what if we could train the machines to do that? And so, we kind of put all our team together, and, we have a series of concepts where we're using computer vision that recognizes different types of fish. And this can be deployed into buoys. It could be deployed in our autonomous vessels. And then it could basically serve as a way to kind of understand if that biomass, if that biodiversity is increasing. And of course, that's not the only way that we count, but we use a bunch of other tools. But I think it's also important. You mentioned something in your question about protection and enforcement. I think right now, I don't know, it's hard to always figure out exactly what number. I think we're somewhere 1.4, 1.8% protected in the world. We got to get to 30%. Some people are arguing and say 4%. I argue and say it's 0% because it's not enforced, at least not in a way that it should be. So on top of our scientific sensors and tools that we have on board, we have a prop fouling system. So we can approach a vessel and we can disable them and disable their propulsion systems if they need to be, And so what we would operate is, just kind of an extension of that particular government. I think this is important because if you don't have a plan for enforcement in these MPAs, then why bother doing it to begin with? The whole point is to not take so that you have this rebound, which then goes back to the whole financial component of why I'm using this as a market cap indicator. Because if I can use this as a market cap indicator, then now you have a financial reason to keep people out of the water. It's not just because you're doing the right thing that you should have been doing anyway. We need a way to keep score. So all of those things are like an ecosystem that feed off of each other.
So I always have been fascinated by the concept of taboo, right? Forbidden. And it seems to make sense when the world had maybe 1 million people, 10 million people on the whole planet. It seems like, that could be easily managed. Oh, look, we're counting the tuna and we don't have a lot of tuna. Don't touch the tuna, let them come back, instead go catch this fish over here. And then it's like, okay, that made sense when there wasn't 8 billion people on the planet. Right. Is this technology that you have created, that you're working on, is this the answer to how we can have that ancient practice in place in a world with 8, maybe 10 billion people? Is it?
I hope so. I mean, I'm kind of betting the farm on it, to be honest with you. I mean, I really feel like this seems to be like Occam's razor, right? The simplest solution is often the best. And this is a pretty damn simple solution. It's not complicated. We're just counting fish and we're trying to see if the environmental conditions are conducive to life. And if you're not measuring that and you're dumping crap in the ocean, how do you know that you're actually doing the thing that you're supposed to? You can create 30% protection around the world and you can dump oil and nitrates in it and it's not going to do one bit of good. And, that's really why we want to come back to this whole measurement thing. And you know what? I'm not the only group that's out there. I mean, there's other groups that are also measuring data from the ocean. What if we can incentivize everybody to share their data and give attribution to the data that they've contributed to the pool? Then all of a sudden people don't mind sharing data because they're going to get paid for it and they're actually going to want to grow that data and do something more. We need a way to incentivize people. I mean, we can't keep asking for stuff for free anymore. And so that's why I'm taking a business twist to this. And, some may not agree with me and that's okay. I'm willing to fail to prove that it's going to work.
Are the governments of the world open to your help in terms of this data collection?
Yeah, I mean, I think, so our first, conversations have been with countries like Australia and the British Virgin Islands. We've had some discussions through the Alligator Head Foundation in Jamaica. And I think for the most part, everyone is open to the idea. I think really what, like in the case of Australia, they really want to understand what the threats are. They have, the Great Barrier Reef that is at risk. Are there excessive amounts of runoff? One of the things I think is really interesting in this is that you have something called ocean color detection. Ocean color detection is when you detect plumes, and usually that's done from space or it's done from aircraft. But by that time, it's far too late. Everything is already in the ocean. But what if you could have highly sensitive sensors that are all at the right points and they could detect basically a leak before it became a catastrophe? That's really where we're at. We have enough capabilities and resources to really find out what the threats are so that we can mitigate those catastrophes. And that's really the core issue here. And I think if we can do that and then go back into these financial models and cross-collateralize the value of life, then I think we start to get to a point where everyone can start to understand, oh, this makes good financial and business sense. I'm hoping that they'll come over to this side and realize that, well, they should have just been doing it all together because it was the right thing to do for the rest of the planet.
Yeah, I'm hearing a couple themes. Obviously, there's a theme of money, right? It's got to make sense financially for everyone involved. And I'm also hearing this theme of prevention. I studied for years under one of the top doctors, one of the first doctors of preventive medicine ever in all of Southern California, who was a surgeon when he started as a medical doctor. And then one day he's like, I'm cutting these people open. I'm pulling out their organs after they're already sick. He's like, what if they never got sick? And he just kind of reversed sides, if you will. And I'm hearing a lot in that with you. Like, how do we prevent this shit from happening before it happens and do it in a way where everybody is prosperous and abundant? There's too much common sense in what you're talking about, Jeremy.
Yeah, but that's the thing. It's like, but I also think that it's common sense now that we know about it and that we're talking about it in this forum. But, talk to me 5-6 years ago, I wouldn't have had this conversation because I didn't know that the problem really existed in the way that it did. But you cannot unlearn this stuff. Now that you've heard this, now you have to do something about it.
That's right. It's like when you fall, like for me, you and I were on a call just before this one talking about our love for the ocean and stories of how we fell in love with the ocean. We were on a clubhouse call, and it's like once it's like the spiritual path. Once you're on that path, even though it's hard and it's razor's edge, there's no getting off. Once you fall in love with the ocean and you start to see what's going on, and learn these things, it's why I created this podcast, right? It's just,
no, I'm glad that you did. I mean, that goes hand in hand. I said on that call too. I'm always quoting Jacques Cousteau's favorite line, which was, people will protect what they love, but they cannot love what they do not understand. And I think as storytellers and artists, that's our job is help them understand, and help them understand what the work that the scientists are doing, why they're doing it, and why it's important for us to live on this planet. Because I'm sure that you've heard this before. The planet's going to be just fine. We don't have to worry about the planet. It's humans that may not be around here for very much longer because we're just blinding idiots.
Oh, yeah. I've been saying this for years now. It's going to go one of two ways. Either the planet is going to be like, you guys are a cancer, and we're just going to spit you off. And maybe the pandemic was a little taste of what that might look like. Very little taste. Or we're going to figure this out. We're going to learn to live in harmony with the planet, which...
Let's hope it's the latter.
Let's hope it's the latter. Okay, a couple more topics I want to hit with you. Now, you mentioned the Great Barrier Reef. Another area that you and I are both focused on is mangroves as a way to draw down carbon and restore coastal ecosystems from erosion and habitat destruction. One of our partners and a podcast guest of mine was Michael Stewart, co-founder of Sea Trees, whose organization is planting sea trees, kelp, mangroves, and restoring coral reefs around the world. Why is the protection of mangroves so important, and what are you doing in this area?
Yeah, mangroves are amazing. I think if there was any type of, fauna that flora and fauna that I would be excited about, it would be mangroves. Mangroves live in the brackish. They live in between kind of freshwater and saltwater. You often see them on beaches. Many people want to knock them down because it gets rid of that ocean view. It's understandable. The ocean's beautiful. We want to see it, but the mangroves, can actually, in some cases, depending on conditions, can sequester 30 to 50 times more carbon than terrestrial forests. But they do more than that. Turns out that little fishies like to make this home, and so it's a nursery for the fisheries. And if we want to rebound the coral reef system, the best thing that we can actually do for the coral reef system is actually plant mangroves, and lots of them. The other thing that's really important is because of coral reef systems dying in certain areas with a storm surge that's kicking up, mangroves can be a natural barricade to storm surge. And so you have a number of different things that are actually really important with mangroves. I mean, the number one thing, of course, would be carbon sequestration. That also goes for kelp and seagrass. And so one of the things that, every year on Necker Island, we have a list of things that need to be brought to light. And then we have deliverables that we have to meet. The idea behind Ultramarine was, that Susi and I both came up with. Susi Mai is my co-founder, which I think she's been on your show too. She said, her and I both feel like, we want to protect 30% of the world's oceans, but how do you do that in a measurable way every 12 months? And so one of the questions was asked at this year's Ultramarine, what's the greatest amount of impact we can make in the shortest amount of time with the funds that, we would spend on anything else? And we heard from Gene Olwang from Virgin Unite. We heard from the Caribbean Accelerator program. We heard from the Wade Institute, and unanimously all of them said, plant mangroves. And so we immediately, people kind of sprung into action there at the summit, and we're working on a project in the British Virgin Islands and the rest of the Caribbean. But I became kind of like, again, this is like, I'm the artist, and I'm always moved by action and how people are moving. And so I created a whole series of works called Bit Mangrove, and these are NFTs, but they're based off of a code that forms in the format of an actual mangrove. And so portions of these sales actually go to these groups that are actively planting mangroves. That's just one little way as an artist that I could do that. For all the artists that are listening here, like, you could create work too, and you could donate to these kinds of things and realize that, your offsets are much greater than anything that you're minting on the blockchain. But I think it's really interesting when we look at this, because the mangrove thing is a very specific and niche project, because it has to have all of the right conditions. You can't have runoff from the island that could potentially contaminate them, but they live about 14 years and they can sequester a good amount of carbon. So one of the things that we're working on at the Ocean Currency Network with some others is we're working on sensor technology that allows us to measure the amount of carbon sequestered from these mangroves. Why this is interesting is because when you have people who are spending or emitting carbon and then having to buy carbon credits, where does that money go? And how do you know if that money is being effective? We want to put all of that on chain where everyone can see where the money goes, what the impact is, and then actually have the measurable carbon that's also on chain that you can actually follow the trail yourself. And so our plan is to really, try to find ways to kind of just tell the story better. It goes back to the whole idea of measurement as a service, and we want to improve things, so therefore we're going to measure it
in a transparent way. So you brought up Ultramarine a few times, and I did interview Susi. You can go back, everyone, and listen to that interview, and we talked about Ultramarine in great detail. A couple questions I have for you on that. How did you guys actually create it? And for those of you that don't know, Necker Island is Sir Richard Branson's epic island where you guys host this event. How did that all come about? Give me the short version of that.
Yeah, the short version is I had a really good friend of mine. Her name is Susanna Barla. And she's like, you have to meet Susi. You guys come from completely different worlds, but you always talk about the same things. And so she put us together. And then Suze and I had a chat. And I remember one of the questions Suze asked me, she's like, well, if you could do anything on Necker related to the ocean, what would it be? And I was like, I think we should get politicians, artists, scientists, philanthropists, and business leaders all in the same space and give them one goal, and boom, Ultramarine was created. And, we were able to kind of get that idea over to Richard, and he wanted it to happen there. And yeah, we're really stoked that, he kind of gives us the capability to host it on Necker, because it's a place where amazing things for the planet have happened. I mean, the carbon whirling was created there. The elders, just so many amazing things. I mean, Virgin Galactic was actually started there. It was just the thought process started by, as Richard tells the story of people sitting in hammocks looking at the sky, wondering if they're ever going to go to space. And so if you can think of something and you put the right people in the room, the key is that I don't have to convince 8 billion people on the planet to do the right thing. But there's probably 100,000 to maybe 500,000 people that have influence over the 8 billion. And I mean, that's exactly what we want. I mean, when you go to Starbucks, if you go to Starbucks, you didn't show up to Starbucks because you wanted a plastic lined paper cup. You just came there for the coffee. So if all of a sudden we got Starbucks to stop using those products and they just got the coffee in a better, more logistical way than it is now, we would all be happy. And therefore, that one group had an effect over millions of people, if not maybe a billion. So that's the kind of mission and the idea that we want to set forth. And I feel like, we've had some really great runs, and we've had some amazing people and some amazing outcomes.
Great points. So very important question. Are you returning to Necker in 2022? And how can I get an invite?
Well, man, and I'm on the record. Well, you are invited, my friend. You should definitely come. I think that it would be great for you to do a podcast from Necker. Maybe you could do a live one from Necker. That would be awesome. It's always good to have more talent.
Thank you.
We're going to be on island. I think it's January 30th through February 6th. And so we're really excited about that. We're really hoping that we can kind of get to that next thing, right? It's like you've had all of these really amazing, deliverables. We've met them, and now we're looking at, what are the bigger things that we need to kind of fight for and really try to help. And that's the theme every year, and hopefully we just kind of chip away at one little thing at a time.
I love it. Yeah, obviously I would love to come, and I'm glad we have this on the record. Not that you said I could come for sure, but if I can support in any way. And we'll share links with everybody, by the way. You can see what happens there. It's not only a beautiful place, but just beautiful people coming together with a common goal, like Jeremy said. So We can have that conversation offline.
I love how you said that was the important question.
What's that?
I said, I love how you said that was the important question.
By far the most important question.
Like all the things we talked about. What about Necker? Are we still doing that thing?
Okay, so this could be my final question. Couple final questions as we wrap up, Jeremy. You're gonna like this one. I know you're gonna like this one. To you, this will be the most important question, as me getting to Necker was for me. If you were granted the title, we mentioned a title before that you liked. I think you'll like this one even more. But if you were granted the title of Master of all space, time, and dimension, a role I feel would suit you well, what would be the top 3 actions that you would take? In other words, what levers would you pull that you feel would make the biggest impact for the ocean and the planet as a whole?
Well, I would redefine how we extract metal from the planet. That would be the first thing that would stop that. I would definitely rewild the world. I mean, it sounds like you've given me a title with like almost infinite godlike power. So if I have that, then I would want to repopulate. Maybe I use some form of DNA and cloning technology. I don't know, to get as many of the wildlife back that we've lost, and put measures in place to stop people from harming the ocean in a way that the entire world can see exactly what they're doing, because they only do it because they do it in the dark.
So the metal issue.
Yep.
Rewilding the wild, it sounds
Yep.
like for the sake of the animals that we still have and the animals that we've destroyed.
Yeah, we've overpopulated this planet from the standpoint of like we've tamed it. You know, I want to go to a place where it's dangerous and wild.
Yeah, exactly. And then third piece, what I heard was basically like just it's educating people, awareness. You know, it's we don't know what we don't know. So, and that's really what this is all about right here, right? Shining the light.
Yeah. I mean, I think, but that, you know, and Sylvia said it 1,000 times. It's like we know now we got to do something about it.
That's right. And like you said, too, and I think this is good because I think a lot of people feel they're confused. They don't know how to make a difference. But I don't want anyone to feel what would be the word? Yeah, don't feel ignorant. Don't feel hopeless, helpless. Like you admitted on one of these issues 5-6 years ago, you don't know anything about it, and you're an expert, you know. So it's like,
I'm not an expert. I'm just a random dude that said enough is enough, and everyone that's listening to this podcast is a random dudette that has the same capability. And I think, you know, it all starts with stopping the absolving yourself of the responsibility. Every single one of us is responsible, so let's get together, let's find a way to unite, and let's just get the job done.
Yeah, I saw an interview the other day. Oh God, what was it about? I can't remember the topic, but the girl being interviewed said that the opposite of love is not hate. The opposite of love is apathy. And to your point, like now we know. Let's take action. And for me, it's watch. Everything I do is about the dolphins and whales. My love for the dolphins and whales. I just want people to fall in love with them so much and the ocean that supports them so that we begin to make all the right decisions. So last question, what advice on this note would you give our listeners who already care about the ocean and they want to make a difference? What can anyone do? And you kind of answered this already, but we'll see where you go with this. What can anyone listening or watching do to be part of the solution?
Yeah, I think, you know, there's a number of things. I mean, first of all, and it's as cheesy as it sounds, look within yourself and really ask yourself, what are you good at?
That's right.
Because every one of us has like some kind of thing that we're really good at. And it might be, you know, illustration. It could be filmmaking. I don't know. Now, whatever that thing is, focus it on one of these things. Focus it on a regenerative blue economy. Focus it on the moratorium and the stopping of deep sea mining that basically extracts conflict minerals from the ocean. Stopping the overfishing problem that's on the planet, you know, all of the things. I think when you look at that, and you can also look to some really great groups around the world who have done amazing things that are they're nonprofits, And honestly, the nonprofit world kind of irritates me a little bit, because half the time they're doing the thing that they say that they're going to do. The other half the time they're out there, pandering for money,
right.
Like politicians. Wouldn't it be better if we just like helped those nonprofits? We did some cool stuff to raise some money to amplify them so they could do the thing that they're really good at. I think that's one thing that, and I think a lot of times, we look at some of these nonprofits and we don't really truly understand all the dynamics of what they do or how they get their money. But I think it's really important to really look at something that speaks to you, and say, hey, let's go for this one. I mean, at Ultramarine, that's one of the things that we do. This last year, we were like, hey, let's focus on, a nonprofit. Let's invite them over and let's help prop them up. And I think every single one of us can do that. There's an artist that recently decided to donate to Oceana. And, and it's like, great, awesome. So they're creating work and they're donating the work. These are some simple things that we can do. But I would be remiss if I didn't mention my friend Tim Silverwood, who created something called Take 3 Australia. He now is running Ocean Impact Organization. Yep, but the reason why I mentioned him is that I loved his idea more than anybody's in the world, because his idea was, if you see 3 bits of rubbish on the beach, the least thing you can do is pick it up and put it in the bin. I mean, you don't have to be a rich guy. You don't have to have tons of money or even a job. You can just see that there's a problem and do something about it. And so there's a little bit of soul searching I'm asking the audience to do, to kind of look within and see what their highest and best use of time is. But when you discover what that is, then you can start focusing energy on some of these bigger issues.
Well said. Yeah, earlier you said to discover what your superpower is.
Yeah.
I always say it this way, like, find your lane and stay in your lane. Whatever it might be. You're kind of an anomaly, because you're tackling so many different issues. You also are a robot, as we established earlier, so you can do that. But I think it's like, we're not going to solve all the problems. Right. But what is it that you most love? What are you most passionate about? And either support a group that's focused on that, start your own group, whatever it is, but definitely take some action. And I love that you brought up the nonprofit world. I recently interviewed Adrian Grenier, and I asked him point blank, and he's the
that
founder
guy.
of.
Oh my God,
that guy.
I love Adrian.
No, he's actually, he followed you to Texas. He's tracking you down.
I know that he's in Austin. He can't come to Dallas. This is my town.
He's not allowed. Okay, I'll let him. I'll make sure he knows that. But I asked him point blank, in all seriousness. I said, "Is the nonprofit world broken? The model?" And he said, "Yeah." And then we got it, and we won't go there now. We'll do that in round 2 of our podcast, McKane Part 2, the redo. That we talked about the merging of the nonprofit world and entrepreneurship, like the merging of not-for-profit and profit, which is everything that you're saying is really based on that. Like, we got to make money so that it can sustain itself.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, imagine if the nonprofit could actually perform properly to where they have an ongoing revenue stream, and they don't have to go around asking for money and raising and doing all these other things. It's a waste of time to begin with.
That's right.
I mean, and if they can't do that, then what if we had groups that, like you and I, or our groups, and said, hey, well, let's just support them. They're doing great stuff. Let's just, let's create something that works and amplify them.
No, and actually, I'd love to talk to you more about that, because that's exactly what I want to be doing. These nonprofits have these amazing people, passionate people, and they're spending the majority of their efforts just trying to raise money and not actually doing what they would want to be doing. So we can, that's a great conversation to have. So Jeremy, you are amazing. I knew this would be a great conversation. And I'm really happy that we covered all the topics that we did and got to hear a little bit about you personally and what makes you tick. And for me, this has been really fun. Like I said, we'll share links to everything that you talked about so people can get more information on these important topics. So I just want to thank you for being here.
No, thanks for having me, man.
Yeah, of course. I'll give you the final word, final thoughts you want to share.
Yeah, I mean, my final thought would be that just constantly think about the ocean. I know that sounds cheesy, and I know that sounds like, the kind of thing that everyone says, but, whether you realize it or not, this planet is actually being controlled by the ocean. And if we're continuing to operate in a way of, just disillusioning ourselves and saying, well, I know I can't really do better right now. I'm just going to go to the store and pick up some more fish. You can't ask yourself where the fish came from or whether you can properly recycle something. if you can't add up all the pieces, then something's not right, and somewhere, somehow, someone else is going to pay the price. And it's like I said before in this interview, is that our passive actions are actively destroying the planet. Let's not do that. Let's not absolve ourselves of responsibility. Let's realize that, we are the ones that have the power. The real threat is that we aren't organized. We're not organized like the opposition is, right? So let's find a way to organize. Let's find a way to get together, and let's try to find a way to be inclusive as possible and not silo off. There's no room for ego in this mix. We are all spaceship Earth crew members, and as Captain Paul Watson says, and we really, really need to kind of focus on this. So my parting thought is, I want every listener that's listening right now to realize that they are part of the Justice League, that they have a superpower, and I urge you to find it, because that's once you've found it and once you start using it and unite, that is the exact moment where we start getting ourselves out of this mess. Because, like I said earlier, all of where we're at right now is because of generations of bad decisions. Let's start making some good ones. And
I'll end with this thought for anyone watching that is saying, oh, that sounds great, but I don't know what my superpower is. Please reach out to me. This is something I've spent 20 plus years as a business coach. I wrote a book about how to discover what your life's passion is. So if you are at all turned on by this conversation, but a little lost and confused about how to go about it, find me, track me down. I will do whatever I can to help. Jeremy, I love you, brother. You're amazing. Let's do this again soon. I appreciate you. That's our show, everybody. Have a great day.